Good afternoon, and thank you for choosing Across the Fence. I'm Will Michael in for Judy Simpson. 3 decades ago, they were nearly wiped out. It was the 1980s, and there were just 7 pairs of common loons found in Vermont. Today, there are more than 70 pairs of loons in the state. It's a conservation success that occurred because of collaboration among people and organizations across the state. Vermont's Loon Conservation Project and its chief partner, the Vermont Fish and Wildlife Department, along with dozens of dedicated volunteers, are securing a future for the loon in waters all across Vermont. Across the Fence's Rebecca Gollin follows the call of the loon.
Right now we're hearing a bird here. It's a spotted sandpiper. A lot of birding we do by ear.
The call of a loon is unmistakable. It's very familiar to anyone who visits Vermont's larger lakes.
You become so used to them, and listening to them, you can tell the difference in their call, and they have quite a personality.
Linda and Bob Tucker spend a lot of their time on the water. The Ludlow couple are avid kayakers and regularly visit a number of the lakes in southern and central Vermont. They enjoy the exercise, but are usually paddling with a purpose.
He's actually the loon ranger, and I'm his assistant. So yes, I go when I'm needed to different places, and he gets me into positions that are really strange, like swimming across the lake to get an egg out of a nest because he can't get close enough with the kayak. You know, that sort of thing is my job.
The Tuckers were recruited by friends to volunteer for the Vermont Loon Conservation Project about 20 years ago.
We had seen loons, heard loons, as we ran around Lake Echo in Vermont. We didn't really know what. We were always asking, what is that? And finally we saw some.
Loons return to Vermont from the New England coast at the end of winter. They start nesting from May to mid-June. The birds are easy to find and watch because of their distinctive black and white coloring and because they spend most of their time on the water.
And we watch them through the summer until they learn to fly, and right up until they leave just before ice. I've been out when there's ice around Lake Nineveh and out there with them, and the little ones are still there. The parents have left. The little ones leave at the end, just before ice sets in. They seem to know because it's only a couple days and there's ice. So I've watched them from the beginning to the end.
When the Tuckers got involved in the project, the loon population in the state was facing a crisis.
They were put on the state endangered species list. Throughout the 80s and early 90s, they were trying to figure out, okay, where's the bigger problem? We put out these nest warning signs to attempt to try to give this island a little bit of space where the loons would nest.
Eric Hansen knows loons.
Takes about a month of incubation. Both male and female share in everything, whether it's nesting, chick rearing, feeding the chick, doing everything. Their behaviors are pretty much identical as far as amount of time spent. When the chicks hatch, they can actually swim within hours. They leave the nest right away. They're done with the nest pretty much for the rest of the summer. That chick may not touch land until it breeds, which on average is a 7-year-old loon. So 7 years of just being on the water or in the air.
Hansen is the project coordinator for the Vermont Loon Conservation Project, which is part of the Vermont Center for Eco Studies, or VCE. The effort started in the late 1970s when scientists realized that the number of loons nesting in the state had dropped dramatically.
So in 1983, there were only 7 pairs that nested in the entire state and maybe another 5 pairs that were around, and they only counted 29 adult loons that year, going statewide to most of the larger lakes. And they realized, there's something going on. So in 1987, they were put on the state endangered species list.
At that time, scientists took a look at the remaining loons and their habitats to figure out what had caused the drastic decline and what could be done to turn it around. One piece of the puzzle was identifying certain types of lead fishing lures as poisonous to the birds and getting those banned. Another important piece was to protect the areas where loons build their nests.
And one of the bigger issues that came up, or obvious issues, especially one that we could have an effect, was at the nesting site. They're very prone to disturbance. They don't walk on land, so if something comes near them, they want to get into the water. They feel safe in the water, but they don't really feel safe sitting there, whether that's a human on shore, whether it's a boater. So trying to protect some of the sites that are on busier lakes. Another place was places like this, reservoirs that go up and down with hydro operation. Is there anything hydro companies could do to stabilize water? Loons are only nesting, just an inch to 4 or 5 inches off the water, somewhere in there. Sometimes it can be a foot, but it doesn't take much for water to go up and flood a nest.
On islands where the birds just can't seem to get a purchase, a successful purchase for whatever reason, we'll use artificial islands. We call them platforms or rafts, which are just really cedar logs with a wire mesh, and we vegetate them. And the loons will use those for nesting. And those are great because they float up and down with the water.
VCE Executive Director Chris Rimmer says that the expanding loon population can lead to issues that are both good and bad.
As the population increases, which it is annually now, there are more and more loons coming back looking for new territories, looking for mates, and some of these birds are actually creating problems for the existing pairs. So a male, for instance, might come into a territory of an existing pair and try to evict the resident male. And there can be some really severe skirmishes. I would call them battles. Now it's a good sign because it means there's a lot of loons and we've done well and they're increasing, but we've seen some territorial takeovers. We've also seen some battles that have resulted in injury and even in 1 or 2 cases death of one of the 2 loons that was fighting. There aren't unlimited available territories for loons, so the birds are competing for the few vacancies that remain. It wasn't a problem we had to think about 20 years ago.
Scientists with the VCE say that a thriving loon population needs clean lakes, healthy shorelines, and a good food base. And all of those things are present here in Vermont. Over 80 pairs of loons have attempted to nest in recent years. But that is not enough to ensure long-term success. Along with the increase in the loon population is an increase in their interactions with humans.
We've done our job. The loons are back. We've changed our name. We're now the Vermont Loon Conservation Project. We're no longer the Vermont Loon Recovery Project. So that always begs the question, are we ready to pack up and leave and move on? For some species you can do that with. For loons though, their habitat overlaps almost entirely with our recreational habitat. Where we like to boat, where we like to picnic. And so there's always this sort of conflict, or potential for conflict. They're on reservoirs that are going to go up and down. So for at least half of our sites out there in the state, we're going to need some sort of management, whether it's nest warning signs or whether it's the rafts, or at least keeping tabs on them a little more closely.
The group currently has placed a number of signs on lakes around the state, indicating loon nesting areas and asking people not to disturb them. Raising awareness has also raised a sense of protectiveness in many places.
This pond is pretty well utilized by a lot of fishermen. There's a fisherman just coming in here. And yet these loon have been able to bring off youngsters over several years. And although it's a small pond and lots of people fishing here, it's amazing that with these signs that they put up, people, they basically feel that they need to protect these birds. And so I've never seen harassment, and the loons have been successful.
The Vermont Loon Conservation Project continues to get calls about loons in distress or stuck on lakes or ponds that aren't big enough for them. Despite that, the species as a whole is thriving in Vermont.
Loons are special just because they're so easy to become part of our lives.
Protecting a special bird and preserving Vermont's natural environment for generations to come. In Killington, I'm Rebecca Gollin with Across the Fence.
Thank you, Rebecca. Our next segment has its roots in Thailand, but is now made in Vermont. Sriracha is a traditional hot sauce from Thailand. 2 Vermont food entrepreneurs have developed a Vermont-specific Sriracha sauce. It's called Vermont Maple Sriracha, which of course includes pure Vermont maple syrup, along with the traditional Sriracha ingredients such as peppers and garlic. Keith Silva tells us more about the Vermont version and the 2 men behind it.
From chips to dips, and from soup to nuts, Sriracha is hot.
Sriracha has become sort of this mainstream style of hot sauce. It's almost like the new ketchup.
And in some cases, it is ketchup. Sriracha is made from chili peppers, garlic, vinegar, sugar, and salt. Its popularity in the U.S. is due to David Tran, the founder of Huy Fong Foods. Tran, a Vietnamese immigrant, developed what's commonly called rooster sauce, the first name in stateside Sriracha.
Lower those down a foot. Yeah.
Jackson Whalen and his business partner, Lenny, Big Lenny Montori, run Vermont Maple Sriracha in Rutland. As the company's name states, it's a very Vermont take on the ubiquitous sauce.
Our hot sauce isn't that spicy by hot sauce standards. You're not going to regret it a day later if you have Vermont Maple Sriracha. And every bottle is unique because every harvest of peppers is different. So we might get a batch of jalapenos that's slightly hotter than the last one, but because we don't add anything like xanthan gum or any of these thickeners or water to it, we can't adjust the heat. So the heat is what it is. It's relatively consistent, but we've had batches at a certain point in the season where the peppers just happen to be hotter.
It took Whalen and Montori 7 tries before they got the recipe to their liking. It's personal preference that guides their business decisions, for better or for worse.
Everything we do here is how would we do it if we did it for ourselves. So when we first started making Sriracha, we would buy these bushels of peppers. And after a pepper gets picked, the first thing that doesn't look good on it is the stem. It starts to dry out. So traditionally, if you're manufacturing hot sauce at scale, you clean everything, but you throw the stems in with it, you grind it up, it becomes part of the sauce. When we were making this, 10 gallons at a time on Lenny's stove, we cut every stem off because that's the way we wanted it because we were going to eat it ourselves. So the same reason, that's why we kept the recipe simple, because we make it like we'd make it for ourselves. Now in terms of economics and profitability, that's kind of coming around to bite us, but we keep reminding ourselves that the reason that people like it so much is because we did take the time to cut the stems off. We did take the time to figure out how to make this natural sauce, preserve it naturally, and not put artificial ingredients into it. If it's not something we would do for ourselves, then we don't do it. So that's sort of the guiding principle of everything we make here.
The production of Vermont Maple Sriracha has gone from being made on Big Lenny's stovetop to a nearby commercial kitchen. Here at the Vermont Farmers Food Center, west of downtown Rutland, Whalen and Montori have built a facility to process Sriracha-flavored cashews, what they call Sriracha shoes. Expansion was another decision that wasn't in the business plan or done by the book.
What business plan? I mean, it's really entrepreneurship by gut. Everything we've done here, we've been told was not possible and that we shouldn't try and do. So if we had paid attention to all the business books and business planning advice that we've gotten, you and I wouldn't be standing here and we wouldn't be making Sriracha shoes because we wouldn't have been able to take control over it. So we've kind of had to throw a lot of that out the window. And specialty foods are a particularly brutal, low-margin business to begin with, so you have to have a little blind ambition,
At $10.99 a bottle, consumers have to show a little blind faith as well. Whalen says customers tell him it's worth every penny.
Yes, our hot sauce is expensive compared to other hot sauces produced at a giant, massive scale. But I think the people that appreciate it value what we put into it and are willing to keep supporting us. So we've been really encouraged that things have continued to grow. We haven't had any artificial spikes where we've crashed really hard. That's an excellent question. Why do we keep doing this? And it really is motivated by the response we get from the people who are eating it.
If there's one thing to say about Vermont Maple Sriracha, it's not too hot, but it sure is getting hotter. In Rutland, I'm Keith Silva with Across the Fence.
You can order Vermont Maple Sriracha from the website, which listed on your screen, or you can call 802-483-3060. Vermont Maple Sriracha is also available at co-ops and specialty food stores across the state. That's our program for today. We know you have choices, so thanks for choosing us. I'm Will Michael, inviting you to join us back here each weekday afternoon for another visit across the fence.